A SWAT officer tased a royal guard, on duty, in broad daylight, in front of tourists and cameras. But what happened next? 7 minutes later, a royal convoy pulled up to the gates and refused to move until the situation was handled their way. Want to know exactly how it unfolded? First, hit that subscribe button and drop a comment below telling us where in the world you're watching from. Now, without further ado, let's get into it. The autumn afternoon light at Horse Guards Parade had that particular London quality, bright but crisp, making tourists pull their scarves tighter as they lined up behind the rope barriers. Phones ready, voices dropping to whispers. Even the loudest groups seemed to understand they were stepping into something bigger than themselves. Mounted beneath the central archway sat Trooper Nathan Bell, absolutely motionless, atop a magnificent black Frisian. His crimson tunic was pressed sharp enough to cut yourself on, his breastplate gleamed like a mirror, and his white gloves gripped the reins with textbook precision. To everyone watching, he looked like every other ceremonial cavalryman you've seen in postcards. The perfect picture of British pageantry, polished and pristine. But here's what those tourists didn't know about the man sitting so still in that saddle. Bell had served 3 tours in Afghanistan with 3 para. He'd held ground during a civilian extraction while sniper fire cracked overhead. There was a shrapnel scar along his right side from an IED that still ached when the weather changed. If you knew what to look for, the subtle way he favoured his left hip, his controlled breathing, you could see the signs of a man who'd learned discipline where it meant survival. But he didn't talk about any of that, didn't post about it online. Nothing in his bearing ever announced it. To the crowds, he was just part of the show, a tradition, a photo opportunity. That was about to change, because across the square, 3 black SUVs had just pulled up in a way that made the palace security staff reach for their radios. The first vehicle didn't belong there, neither did the second. By the time the third rumbled past the "No Vehicle Access" sign and parked crooked near Horse Guards Road, you could feel something shift in the air. It wasn't panic, not yet. It was that subtle tension you get when everyone around you realizes something's wrong, but nobody wants to be the first to say it out loud. The guards couldn't move. Protocol wouldn't let them. But inside the nearby security post, a civilian palace staffer set down her tea with a soft clink and quietly pressed a button under her desk, the one marked "Unscheduled Diplomatic Activity." The SUVs had diplomatic plates, sure, but the wrong kind. No royal escort, no ceremonial formation, no entry logged at Admiralty Arch. These weren't dignitaries arriving for afternoon tea with the Foreign Secretary. They'd bypassed every checkpoint, ignored every protocol, and rolled up like they owned the place. Out stepped Lieutenant Carl Rains, 6'2", tactical vest open, mirrored sunglasses, early 40s. American SWAT, supposedly on loan to some UK-US exercise in Essex. But his swagger said he wasn't in Essex anymore. Behind him, 4 men in tactical gear emerged. One carried a training non-lethal duffel. All bore American flag patches and TAC-DEV X tabs. Tourists made room. Something felt aggressive about these men. 2 stewards approached with British urgency. "Excuse me, sir, this is a restricted ceremonial area." Rains flashed a credential without slowing. "Lieutenant Rains, US Tactical Exchange, Joint Ops Oversight." "Sir, this isn't an approved observation area." "Relax, mate, we're not here to break anything." He stepped past the rope barriers. "You must be the welcoming committee." Bell didn't move, not even a blink. Rains studied the stillness like a party trick. "I've seen shop window mannequins more responsive. Bet you 20 quid he's asleep under that helmet." Uncomfortable chuckles from tourists. Rains pulled out a protein bar, unwrapped it, and circled Bell's horse while chewing. The horse shifted, but Bell rebalanced smoothly. "What's the deal? You blink, you lose, or are you trained to ignore people?" The steward stepped closer. "Sir, you're violating ceremonial boundaries. These guards are under active royal protocols." "What's he going to do? Glare me to death?" Tourists had stopped taking selfies. Now they were just watching, waiting. You could feel the tension building like static electricity before a thunderstorm. You could pinpoint the exact moment Rains got bored. He shifted his weight, let out an exaggerated yawn, and crossed his arms like a man waiting for a delayed flight. The ceremonial silence that tourists found so impressive, it was starting to get under his skin. "This is security," he scoffed. "This is what you put between your royalty and the real world? A guy in fancy dress on a horse?" He tapped his temple mockingly. "I swear he's just a life-sized action figure." Few tourists exchanged awkward glances. An elderly woman whispered to her husband, "Perhaps we should move along." But they didn't move, because Rains was just getting started. He stepped closer. The horse's ears flicked, but Bell didn't flinch, eyes fixed on that invisible point ahead. "I'm just interacting," Rains said when the steward protested. "We're allies. I've got clearance." "You know, I've watched videos of these guys. They're not allowed to move, right? No matter what you do. Perfect job for someone who flunked basic but still wanted the uniform." He spoke into his shoulder mic. "We've got a situation. Suspect in a persistent vegetative state. Might need a defibrillator." His teammates laughed. A few tourists chuckled nervously. Rains unclipped something black with yellow markings. A taser. "Let's see if this statue twitches." "Sir, no!" The steward lunged forward, too far away. The taser clicked. The dart struck Bell's thigh below his cuirass. Sergeant reared slightly, but Bell absorbed the shock. His grip tightened imperceptibly. He didn't fall, didn't cry out. When the current ended, Bell remained mounted, positioned correctly, staring ahead. Rains stepped back grinning. "Just a test, training exercise." Gasps from tourists. A child whispered, "Did that man hurt the soldier?" Bell kept breathing steadily. Blood seeped through his glove where his grip had tightened. Nobody laughed. From deep within the palace, shadows moved. The silence that followed wasn't respectful tourist quiet. This was heavy silence that comes right before everything changes. Bell sat exactly as before. If anything, he looked taller. His grip remained textbook perfect. His saber hung undisturbed. But you could see the evidence. The scorch mark darkening his breeches, the red streak in his white gloves. He had taken a direct hit from a live electrical weapon, and he was still sitting perfectly upright, maintaining his post like it was just another Tuesday afternoon. Rains chuckled, but the sound came out hollow now, lacking the confidence it had carried just minutes earlier. "Well, that's one way to test your focus under pressure." Nobody was laughing with him anymore. The steward beside the rope barrier was already speaking into his sleeve mic in those clipped, coded phrases that security personnel use when situations have moved beyond routine. His face didn't show panic, it showed training kicking in. Within 60 seconds, a plainclothes corporal from the Royal Military Police emerged from the West Wing. He wore no hat, carried no weapon, just an earpiece and a green armband trimmed in gold. He approached Rains with the calm confidence of someone who'd spent years ending situations without having to raise his voice. "Sir, I need you to step away from the guard immediately." Rains pivoted, saw the armband, and gave another one of those sarcastic little salutes. "Easy there, Officer Friendly. I didn't damage your living statue." "This is ceremonial territory under active sovereign detail," the corporal replied evenly. "You've engaged in unauthorized use of a weapon against a member of the Queen's Guard while on active duty." "Oh, come on," Rains said, his voice taking on that incredulous tone people use when they think everyone else is overreacting. "It's a taser, not even close to lethal. I honestly didn't think he'd even feel it through all that fancy costume. And look, he didn't even flinch." The corporal's expression didn't change. "Sir, step back from the guard. Remove any visible weapons and place them on the ground. Now." You're serious about this? The corporal didn't answer with words. But behind him, 2 more Royal MPs had materialised, not running, not shouting, just moving with that particular kind of purpose that makes smart people start cooperating immediately. Raines's team began to shift nervously. The one with the expensive sunglasses took a half step forward before catching himself. Another muttered something unintelligible under his breath. The corporal's eyes never left Raines's face. "Are you refusing to comply with a direct order on Crown property, Lieutenant?" "Look, I'm here under diplomatic training protocol," Raines snapped, his composure finally starting to crack. "I've got immunity status. We're doing some kind of urban mobility workshop with your Ministry of Defence next week. This whole thing is it's a misunderstanding." A pause. Then the corporal said, with the kind of calm that somehow sounds more threatening than shouting, "That can be sorted out through proper channels, not here." Raines let out an agitated breath, clearly realising that his usual approach wasn't working in this particular situation. He placed the taser on the ancient cobblestones with an exaggerated sigh. "There, are we all happy now?" The corporal didn't answer, because behind him another figure had entered the scene. Captain Hannah Rees, Royal Horse Guards. Mid-40s, with that particular bearing that comes from 20 years of managing situations where protocol meets crisis. Her chestnut hair was pinned in a regulation bun that hadn't shifted despite the October breeze. Her dress blues were pressed to perfection, and her eyes had the colour and warmth of fog rolling over the Thames. She walked directly toward Bell's horse, ignoring Raines entirely, as if he'd already ceased to be relevant to the situation. She stopped just left of Bell's stirrup and looked up at him with the professional assessment of a commanding officer checking on her soldier. "Trooper Bell," she said in a voice that carried clearly across the courtyard, "are you capable of continuing your post?" For a moment, Bell's jaw flexed slightly, the first real sign of human response he'd shown since the whole ordeal began. His lips didn't part, but something shifted in his posture. Then, without moving his eyes from that fixed point ahead, without looking down at his captain, he spoke. "Still fit for duty, ma'am." His voice wasn't loud, but in the hushed courtyard it landed like a stone dropped into still water. Captain Rees gave a single sharp nod. No drama, no fuss, just professional acknowledgement between soldiers. Then she turned to the RMP corporal. "Secure the American personnel under temporary observation until Palace Protocol can provide guidance. No external communication until this is resolved." "Ma'am?" Raines let out a bark of disbelieving laughter. "You're joking. I'm not under arrest here." Captain Rees turned her head just enough to make eye contact. "You're under review." And just like that, with no more ceremony than a gear clicking into place, the entire dynamic in the courtyard shifted. Tourists backed away without being asked. Phones were lowered and pocketed. A quiet understanding settled over everyone present. Something sacred had been violated here today. But the soldier hadn't broken. And now, the people who'd built this tradition were going to remind the man who'd tried to break it exactly where he stood in the order of things. Because somewhere down the mall, just 7 minutes away from Horse Guards, a Royal Convoy was making an unscheduled turn. And it wouldn't be passing through those gates until this situation was properly addressed. The sound started as a distant rumble, so faint you might have mistaken it for London traffic if you weren't listening carefully. But then came the unmistakable rhythm of perfectly synchronized motorcycle engines, followed by the deeper, more refined purr of vehicles that cost more than most people's houses. The Royal Convoy, no sirens, no flashing lights, no need for either. When the Crown moves through London, the city simply makes room. First came the motorcycle outriders, 5 of them in black leathers and chrome, their blue strobes pulsing silently as they swept around the corner from Horse Guards Road. Behind them, Two Rolls-Royce limousines in that distinctive dark maroon that only one family in Britain is allowed to use, followed by support vehicles that looked ordinary until you noticed the way they moved. Coordinated, purposeful, expensive. Captain Rees turned toward the palace gates, her expression shifting in a way that only trained military personnel would recognize, calm, sharpening into absolute precision. A suited aide was already moving toward her from the gatehouse, and they exchanged a few brief words that no one else could hear. The convoy didn't continue through the gates. Instead, it stopped. Right there in the middle of the ceremonial approach, engines idling quietly, windows tinted too dark to see through. But the message couldn't have been clearer if they'd hung a banner from the lead vehicle. Royalty was watching. Not intervening, not making demands, just waiting to see how the palace would handle its own affairs. Rains laughed, but it came out sharp and nervous now. "Oh, for real? Is that one of your royals in there?" He shielded his eyes dramatically and leaned forward like he was trying to peer through the bulletproof glass. "She here to knight the mannequin or something?" His voice still carried that forced bravado, but you could hear the cracks forming underneath. The swagger that had carried him through the last 20 minutes was starting to wobble. His men had gone completely silent now, and one of them had removed his sunglasses to clean them, with the kind of intense focus that people use when they're trying to avoid eye contact with everyone around them. No one responded to his joke. Not the MPs, not Captain Rees, not even the tourists, who seemed to sense that the rules of the game had just changed completely. The tension in the courtyard deepened, like pressure dropping before a storm. From the south entrance, two matte green Land Rovers, with Royal Military Police markings, rolled into view, not speeding, not rushing, just moving with the kind of deliberate purpose that usually precedes either formal arrests or very serious conversations. The lead vehicle's door opened, and out stepped Colonel James Lowry. If you wanted to cast someone to play senior British military officer in a movie, you'd choose someone who looked exactly like Colonel Lowry. Silver hair perfectly trimmed, tall enough to look down at most people without trying, uniform so perfectly pressed it could probably stand up by itself. The kind of man who didn't need to speak loudly to command attention in rooms full of generals, and whose measured silences carried the weight of entire military manuals. He walked across the courtyard with that particular pace that military people recognize immediately. Not fast, not slow, just utterly inevitable. The tourists weren't filming anymore. Phones had been lowered or turned off entirely. Whatever this moment was becoming, it felt too serious for casual documentation. Colonel Lowry didn't look at Rains, didn't acknowledge his team. He walked past the rope barriers, past the MPs, past everyone else, and stopped directly beside Trooper Bell's left stirrup. There, without any fanfare whatsoever, he removed his dress gloves. Then, with the careful respect you'd show examining a wounded comrade, he reached up and gently lifted the fabric of Bell's ceremonial breeches. The scorch mark was clearly visible, a dark, circular burn where the taser dart had penetrated the red wool. The skin underneath was hidden, but the evidence of the assault was undeniable. Colonel Lowry examined the damage for exactly 3 seconds. Then he gave a single precise nod and let the fabric fall back into place. He turned, not to Rains, but to Captain Rees. "This is now a sovereign-level incident," he said quietly, but in the hushed courtyard his words carried to everyone present. "Secure all foreign personnel within the operational area. Inform MOD liaison that Protocol Override 47B has been activated." Captain Rees didn't hesitate. "Understood, sir." Now Rains spoke up, his voice louder and more desperate than it had been all afternoon. "Wait just a minute here. Are you people actually serious about this? I tapped him with a training device. He's obviously fine." No one looked at him. His words just hung in the air, stripped of all the authority they'd carried 20 minutes earlier. "I'm part of a legitimate NATO training group," he continued, gesturing toward his credentials with increasing desperation. "You want to call Washington, they'll tell you exactly who I am and why I'm authorized to be here." Colonel Lowry finally turned to face him, and his expression was completely unreadable. You had authorization to observe ceremonial procedures. You did not have authorization to engage with active personnel, and you certainly did not have authorization to assault a British soldier in the execution of his duties under royal jurisdiction. Raines's face was reddening now. He didn't even move. How is that assault when the guy didn't even react? Colonel Lowry's response came back cold enough to freeze champagne. He moved when it mattered, Lieutenant. You didn't. What happened next wasn't dramatic. There were no raised voices, no weapons drawn, no Hollywood-style confrontations. Just the kind of methodical, professional response that makes you realize, usually too late, that you've badly misjudged who you're dealing with. Colonel Lowry didn't need to shout orders. He simply turned to the Royal Military Police Corporal and gave the slightest nod. One of the MPs stepped forward, extending a steady hand. "Sir, I'll need your remaining weapons. Please comply slowly and deliberately." With movements that were just a little too careful, Raines unsnapped his holster, drew his service pistol slowly, and placed it butt first into the waiting hands of the corporal. A second MP collected the remaining equipment from his belt. Both items were tagged, catalogued, and removed without any ceremony whatsoever. Colonel Lowry turned to Captain Rees. "Rotate Trooper Bell. Medical assessment, priority handling." "Yes, sir." Within moments, another guard emerged from the stable archway. Trooper Singh, younger, sharper-eyed, already mounted on a horse that matched Bell's perfectly. The changeover happened with the kind of precision you only see in organizations that have been doing the same job for centuries. Bell and Singh passed each other in mirror formation, spines straight, eyes forward. No words exchanged, no acknowledgement of the crowd or the drama, just duty, continuing uninterrupted. Bell dismounted behind a privacy screen where a medic was waiting. He moved with just the slightest limp, barely noticeable unless you were watching for it, but he didn't lean on the medic's offered support. He didn't speak, didn't look back at the courtyard, didn't give any sign that what had just happened was anything more than part of the job. A young aide approached the convoy's lead vehicle with a sealed envelope bearing official crests. He passed the message to someone inside and stepped back respectfully. The Rolls-Royce's indicator light blinked once, then went dark. The convoy still didn't move. Raines made one final attempt to salvage something from the wreckage of his afternoon. "So what now? Am I banned from your little palace? I poke a guy with a training device, and suddenly I'm persona non grata in the United Kingdom?" Colonel Lowry stepped closer, close enough that Raines had to look up slightly to maintain eye contact. "You're not banned, Lieutenant," he said, his voice carrying the kind of quiet that somehow sounds more dangerous than shouting. "You're simply irrelevant." He moved even closer, until they stood less than arm's length apart. "That man you struck, he commanded a forward observation post in Helmand Province while you were still conducting traffic stops in suburban Kansas. He watched a 19-year-old corporal bleed out in his arms and still maintained his position until the mission was complete. You subjected him to electrical assault. He absorbed it without complaint and remained at his post." Colonel Lowry's voice never rose above conversational level, but each word hit with surgical precision. "You made a spectacle of yourself in front of children, tourists, and now—" He gestured toward the waiting convoy. "Her Royal Highness." He paused, letting that sink in. "And you want to know the most pathetic part of all this?" Raines couldn't seem to find his voice. "He's not angry with you. He's not even insulted. You didn't get under his skin or prove some point about military effectiveness. You simply didn't matter enough to affect him." Another pause, longer this time. "No apology you could offer will ever change that fact." An aide emerged from the gatehouse with a leather folder sealed with red wax. Colonel Lowry scanned the contents and passed it to Captain Rees. Inform the Foreign Office that exchange status for Lieutenant Rains is revoked effective immediately. Escort him and his unit to the embassy perimeter. They are no longer welcome on Crown property under any circumstances. Understood, sir. Rains stared. You're revoking me? Over this? You're ending an entire joint training program because I tested some ceremonial actor's reflexes? Colonel Lowry turned toward the Royal Convoy and offered a small formal inclination of his head. The signal was understood immediately. The lead Rolls-Royce activated its indicator and began moving forward again, resuming its original path through the palace gates. As it passed the square, the vehicle didn't accelerate. When you represent 1,000 years of unbroken tradition, urgency is beneath you. From behind the tinted windows, just for a moment, a gloved hand appeared between the curtains. Not a wave, nothing so casual, just a brief acknowledgement. One of Rains's aides spoke quietly. "Lieutenant, I think we need to go." Rains looked around one final time, as if searching for some foothold, some last opportunity to reclaim control of a situation that had moved completely beyond his influence. But there was nothing left to grab onto. The tourists were watching, yes, but they weren't watching him anymore. They were looking at the red-coated figure who had returned to his post, unmoved, undisturbed, and utterly unchanged by the afternoon's events. And behind those quiet stares was a message that needed no words. You don't speak for us. You never did. By the time the evening light began to soften into that golden hour glow that makes London look like it's been painted in watercolours, something approaching normal had returned to Horse Guards Parade. The square wasn't empty. Tourists still lined the rope barriers, though fewer than before. But something fundamental had changed in the atmosphere. Many of the people who'd witnessed the afternoon's events hadn't left at all. They stood quietly, phones pocketed, faces thoughtful. They'd seen something they couldn't quite articulate, but felt in their bones. And then, without fanfare or announcement, Trooper Nathan Bell returned. He rode in slowly from the western archway, mounted once again on Sergeant, the same magnificent black horse, the same polished ceremonial saddle, the same perfect military bearing. But his breeches were different now, fresh ones, pressed to knife-edge perfection, showing no sign of damage or distress. Yet everyone who'd been present knew what lay beneath that pristine uniform. They'd seen the evidence of the taser's impact. They'd watched him absorb electrical assault without flinching. They understood that his return wasn't just professional duty, it was a statement. Bell resumed his position as if he'd never left it. Hands steady on the reins, spine straight as a sword blade, eyes fixed on that invisible, eternal point ahead that guards are trained to focus on. He didn't acknowledge the crowd, didn't nod to the security staff, didn't even glance toward the gate where Rains had been escorted away less than an hour before, because discipline isn't performance, it's presence. A few yards away, a father crouched beside his young daughter, the same little girl who'd asked earlier whether the American man was allowed to hurt the soldier. She tugged on his sleeve and whispered, "Daddy, is that the same guard?" Her father nodded. "That's him." But he didn't move when the bad man hurt him. "No," he said softly. He stood his ground. She considered this for a moment, her child's mind working through concepts that adults struggle to understand. "Is he okay now?" "He's better than okay, sweetheart," the man replied. "He's exactly where he belongs." Behind them, an older gentleman in a grey wool coat, the kind with a small remembrance poppy pinned to the lapel, spoke just loud enough for those nearby to hear. "That man held his dignity like it was a weapon," he said, nodding toward Bell. "And it was more effective than anything that American brought with him." And Bell hadn't broken. Not when provoked, not when attacked, not when everything in his training and instincts must have been screaming at him to respond. He had simply endured, and in enduring, he had won something more valuable than any confrontation could have provided. As the last echoes of the Royal Convoy faded into the London evening, the crowd began to disperse, but slowly, thoughtfully. They moved like people leaving a cathedral rather than a tourist attraction. Not as casual observers anymore, but as witnesses to something rare and important. They'd seen tradition not just survive a challenge, but answer it. Not with force or anger or retaliation, but with composure, with presence, with the quiet, unshakable knowledge that some things are more important than the people who try to diminish them. And as Trooper Bell maintained his silent vigil, motionless, professional, unbroken, those watching came to understand something fundamental about strength. It's not about who can hit hardest. It's about who can stand longest. It's about who refuses to be moved when moving would be easier. It's about the difference between demanding respect and earning it so completely that even your enemies have no choice but to acknowledge it. The American had brought weapons and authority and diplomatic credentials. The Guard had brought nothing but discipline, and discipline had won. So here's the question we're left with. When someone tries to break you down in public, what's the stronger response? Fighting back or refusing to break? And in our age of instant reactions and social media responses, is there still power in choosing silence over spectacle? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. We read every single one, and these conversations matter more than you might think. If this story made you think differently about strength and dignity, if it showed you something about what real authority looks like, hit that like button. It genuinely helps more than you know. Subscribe and tap that notification bell so you never miss our daily stories about the remarkable men and women who guard these ancient traditions. And if you know someone who could use a reminder about what genuine strength looks like, someone who thinks power means making the most noise until people pay attention, share this video with them. Your next Royal Guard story is waiting on your screen right now. Click it, and we'll see you tomorrow with another moment that proves the same truth over and over again. Real strength doesn't announce itself, it simply stands. And when it does, even the loudest voices in the world discover they have nothing left to say.